Imagine a quiet village under the moonlit sky. Families asleep, unaware that before dawn, ruthless warriors would storm their homes, fires lighting up the darkness, mothers clutching their children, praying to see the sun rise again. Tonight, as you lay in silence, let me take you back to the time when Spain fell into the hands of invaders and the land turned into a realm of endless fear and sorrow. Land and people and Gothic sway. When we look back at the histories of Spain and Portugal, we find lessons hidden in their past, lessons that hold great value even for us today. Their stories remind us that independence and liberty are not just fancy words spoken by poets or leaders, but the very breath that keeps a nation alive. It's clear from their history that a country's true wealth and power come not only from its gold, its fertile lands, or its brave people, but from its freedom. No matter how rich the land is, no matter how peaceful life seems from the outside, if a foreign power or a cruel ruler sits on its neck, it slowly destroys the country's soul. Because in the end, neither vast territories nor calm streets can heal the wounds of a people chained to a foreign yoke or crushed under despotic rule. Just think about that for a moment. And when we talk about Spain, we can't ignore its unique position on the map. You see, the Spanish Peninsula, when you look at it as a whole, it carries with it the gifts of both an island and a vast continent. Almost completely surrounded by the sea, Spain feels like an island, blessed with the riches of trade and the bounty of fisheries, her shores kissed by endless waves. But at the same time, there is that narrow neck of land that connects her to France. And on that neck rise the Great Pyrenees Mountains, standing tall like silent guards, protecting Spain from sudden invasions, and giving her a strong barrier against her northern neighbor. Yet, this connection also saves her from being completely at the mercy of the winds and waves, unlike a lonely island cut off from the world. In a way, it's as if nature itself wanted Spain to have the best of both worlds. And when you look deeper into Spain's land and skies, you see even more blessings. The climate there carries the gentle warmth of southern Europe, but it's never harsh or burning because the sea breezes blowing from almost every side keep it pleasant and alive. Its soil, that soil, it gives birth to everything needed for life and even the things that make life beautiful. Golden fields of corn, sweet, juicy fruits, vineyards stretching under the sun to give their fine wines, flocks of merino sheep with their soft wool, and olive trees yielding their precious oil. And then there are the mountains, hiding deep within them, treasures of minerals, gold, and silver that once upon a time were among the richest supplies in all of Europe. The people born on this land, they too carried nature's strength within them. Brave, sober, hardy, and always ready to take on the unknown with their spirit of enterprise. Yet, despite all these blessings, despite all these gifts from the earth and sky, Spain, the same Spain that once shook Europe in the 16th century, making kings and queens fear its growing power, dreaming of becoming a universal empire, was for a long time one of the most enslaved, oppressed, ignorant, and poorest among the civilized countries. Just imagine how a land so favored could fall into such darkness. But to truly understand Spain's journey, we have to go back, way back, to its earliest days. In those ancient times, Spain was home to a people who were quite alike in many ways. They were called the Iberians. Their language connected them, making them seem like one big family spread across the land. But, historians believe that this unity we see was not how things began. It was actually the result of a long process of many changes and developments that happened quietly over countless generations. Sadly, when it comes to those prehistoric times, Spain's secrets remain hidden. Our knowledge of that era is still too limited to to solve even the most basic mysteries of how these people lived or where exactly they came from. Yet, scholars do have some ideas. They say, just like Northern Africa, Southern Europe, and Western Asia, the Pyrenean Peninsula was probably settled by a race of people who were short-headed, dark-haired, and light-skinned. Some call them the Armenoids, and from a language point of view, they are also known as the Alarodians. Imagine them, those ancient men and women, moving across wild lands, carrying with them the seeds of what Spain would one day become. Imagine them, those ancient men and women, moving across wild lands, carrying with them the seeds of what Spain would one day become. But as time flowed on, changes came to their world, just as waves keep shaping the shore. The people we now call the Iberians were most likely not just one simple tribe. Instead, they were a mixture, a blending of that ancient dark-haired population with another race that came from the cold north. This new group was long-headed, with lighter hair, the Cro-Magnon people who journeyed down from northern lands, through France, and even touched northern Africa. Because of Spain's place on the map, resting quietly between France and Africa, it was only natural that these northern travelers would pass through and leave their mark. And this isn't just guesswork. Pieces of their culture, buried deep under the soil, tell us that this mixing was real, almost a certainty. Even today, if you travel through Spain and Portugal, you'll find many people with blonde hair. Most folks believe blondes are rare there, but in truth, these features go back to those ancient days when northern hordes first entered and settled the land. And that was only the first wave. History tells us there were 2 more invasions after them, each adding new threads to Spain's human fabric. Perhaps these newcomers brought their own language and made it the tongue of the land. Some traditions even say that the Iberians' ancestors came from Gaul, what we now call France. Maybe they were talking about these blonde invaders, their arrival, forever changing who the Iberians were. Interestingly, similar stories exist about the Sicanians and Siculians, ancient people of southern Italy who lived just across the waters from northern Africa. They too are believed to be related in some way to these Iberian tribes. History is full of such hidden connections waiting to be uncovered. History is full of such hidden connections waiting to be uncovered. But when it comes to the Iberians themselves, a great mystery still hangs over their true origin. Where exactly did they come from? This question has always puzzled scholars, and perhaps will forever remain unanswered. For a long time, respected historians believed that the Iberians, just like the Celts, were a branch of the great Indo-European family. They thought these people had traveled across southern Europe from the distant slopes of the Caucasus Mountains. It was a theory held almost as truth by the wisest minds of their time. But more recent research has begun to shake faith in that belief. What we do know for sure is how these Iberians looked. They were a long-headed race, short in stature, with very dark complexions and thick, curly black hair. In the Neolithic age, they probably spread throughout all of Spain. Perhaps they came after an even older race, whose traces still remain today in the Basques, that small, proud people living in the north of Spain and southwest of France, speaking a language that connects to no other in Europe. Or maybe the Iberians were themselves the first true inhabitants of Spain, dating back to those prehistoric times when Africa and Europe, and perhaps even America, were connected by ancient land bridges. One thing seems clear though, their physical features do not support the idea that they were of Indo-European or Aryan origin. If you want to see what those early Iberians might have looked like, just look across the sea to the Kabyle tribes of the Atlas Mountains in North Africa. These were the original people of the African coast opposite Spain, pushed back into the mountains by endless waves of invaders. But it wasn't just in their looks that they resembled the Iberians. Their ways of life, their deep-rooted character, and their fierce independence mirror what the early Iberians were. Even today, if you see the Spaniards' proud, unbending nature, it carries echoes of these ancestors. For just like the Atlas tribes, The Iberians lived in strong clans and tribes, and their greatest trait was their indomitable spirit of local independence. No ruler, no conqueror could ever fully break their will. No ruler, no conqueror could ever fully break their will. And if you look at how Spanish life has always been, you will see this spirit woven deep into their daily world. From the earliest dawn of history, the very heart of Spain was its towns. The pueblo. For a Spaniard, his pueblo means far more than a town does to an Englishman or a Frenchman. It is not just a place on a map, it is his life, his pride, his history, and his very identity. In North Africa, no master race, no empire, ever succeeded in binding the Kabyles, the Tuaregs, or the Berbers into a single united state. But in Spain, the Romans did what others could not. They brought together the mixed tribes of Iberians and Celts, welding them into a functioning society. And yet, even today, despite countless constitutions written on paper and endless political experiments that have come and gone, the pueblo still holds its own. The central government may have federated these pueblos into provinces, but it has never been able to erase or fully absorb that original seed of local self-rule. If you walk through a Spanish village today, you will still see the old granary, the pozito, standing with quiet dignity, just like its counterpart in the villages of the Atlas Mountains. The town pastures, the communal farmlands, they continue to exist on both sides of the strait, silent witnesses to the ancient connection between the Iberians and the Afro-Semitic races. These races included the Egyptians, or Copts, the Kabyles, the Tuaregs, and the Berbers. Today, the Iberian language itself is lost to time, but enough of it remains carved onto coins from the later Celtiberian period to tell us something powerful. Their language shared its roots with the tongue spoken by the Egyptians and the Saharan peoples from Senegal to Nubia. When we stand before all this evidence, it becomes hard to hold on to the theory that the Iberians came from the distant Caucasus. Long before written history began, back when humans were just emerging from the Neolithic age, a vast wave of Celts came pouring down from the north, crossing the western Pyrenees and entering the land we now call Spain. It was a time when the world was changing forever. The Celts and Celtiberians. It was a time when the world was changing forever. This brings us to the story of the Celts and the Celtiberians. The second great invasion from the north was that of the Celts. Unlike the earlier migrations lost in prehistory, this Celtic arrival falls within the first period of recognized history. Yet, even then, we know so little about how it truly happened or what conditions led to it. The records are silent on their journey, and all we can really do is look at the results they left behind. We don't even know for sure if the Celts who marched into Spain came at the same time as those who swept into Upper Italy and southern Germany. Those Celtic tribes, whose fierce warriors traveled even further, reaching as far as Asia Minor and the ancient lands of Greece. But, looking at all the evidence, it does seem likely that these invasions were part of the same great wave of Celtic expansion. A tide of people surging south and east, changing forever the lands they touched. And in Spain, their coming would leave a mark that time could never erase. And in Spain, their coming would leave a mark that time could never erase. The Celts, when they crossed south over the Pyrenees, brought with them a whole new way of life. They introduced a fresh culture into the land, a culture that belonged to the advanced Iron Age, which came after the long era of bronze. Before their arrival, agriculture in Spain was still in its earliest beginnings. The pure-blooded Iberians, for a long time, continued living as their ancestors had. They survived mostly on the products of their goat herds, gathering acorns from the mountain forests and growing only small amounts of grain using simple, primitive methods. For them, life was about taking what the earth gave, without trying to change or shape it too much. The Celts, however, like most conquering nations, saw the world differently. They themselves considered farming beneath the dignity of a free man. To till the soil, to bend your back and dig, was not for the warrior class. But even so, they understood its importance. So they forced their dependents, the people they ruled over, to cultivate the lands properly, to sow, to harvest, and to deliver a share of these products to their Celtic overlords. In this way, under the shadow of Celtic power, agriculture slowly began to grow in Spain. And with it came changes that would ripple through the centuries. And with it came changes that would ripple through the centuries. Yet, it is important to remember that this Celtic flood did not cover all of Spain. Their invasion only reached certain parts of the peninsula. One Celtic tribe, later simply called the Celtics, settled around the middle reaches of the Guadiana River in the region that today we know as Badajoz. Then there were the Artebrians, who made their home along the northwestern coast, living mostly apart from the native Iberian people, keeping to their own ways. But in the heart of Spain, in what we now call Old Castile, a great mixing took place. Here, the Celts and Iberians blended together, forming a new people, the Celtiberians. These Celtiberians grew powerful and brought under their control many of the neighboring Iberian tribes. The Iberians they conquered were more cultured perhaps, but they lacked the harsh, warlike nature of the mountain folk. However, it would be wrong to imagine that the Celts ever ruled the entire Pyrenean Peninsula. Even among the Celtic tribes themselves, there was no true unity. Many proud mountain peoples, such as the Lusitanians in the west, and the Asturians, Cantabrians, and Vasconians in the north, kept their independence. They lived free, high in their rugged hills, untouched by Celtic domination. Southern Spain, too, was spared from Celtic control. Under its milder skies, a gentle culture had begun to bloom early on, and this region saw the arrival of very different strangers at its shores. The Phoenicians. These were traders and seafarers, men whose eyes glittered with dreams of commerce. They saw in Spain a land full of promise for their trade. Even before the Phoenicians came, the people of southern Spain knew of the gold and silver lying hidden in their lands. They fashioned simple ornaments from these metals, though they did not place great value on them, nor did they work too hard to gather them. But when the Phoenicians arrived, with marvels of foreign craftsmanship to offer in exchange, only then did the people of Spain begin to truly seek out the treasures buried beneath their soil. Yet, the Phoenicians were not the first traders or pirates to sail to these western shores. The fact that Iberian tribes had reached as far as Lower Italy shows that sea travel and trade already existed. In the same way, Etruscan merchants from Italy must have touched the coasts of Spain. And if you look at the strange stone towers of Sardinia, the Nurhags, solid and silent, standing guard along the shores, you will see their story. These towers were built to protect the people against the pirates who roamed the Mediterranean, even in prehistoric times. Far away in ancient Egypt, the only land then keeping true historical records, robber hordes would often appear upon its coasts, coming from these very seas. But beyond these scattered clues, we know so little of those ancient times. Silent, lost, like voices carried away by the winds of history. Silent, lost, like voices carried away by the winds of history. Then came the Phoenicians. Between around 1,500 and 600 BC, these seafarers, driven by an unending instinct for profit, set their sails toward Spain. They were among the first who looked upon this land and saw not just mountains and plains, but opportunities waiting to be turned into gold. No one knows exactly when they first began their dealings with the people of Spain, but what we do know is that their settlements soon rose along the coast of Baetica. Of all these settlements, Cadiz, known to us today as Cadiz, was the first and the strongest. From these coastal towns, the Phoenicians supplied the Iberian natives with goods from Asia Minor and from across the shores of the Mediterranean. In return, they took what Spain held deep within her earth: gold, silver, and iron. Before the Phoenicians arrived, it is said, the Celts and Iberians barely knew the use of these metals. At first, for their trade and for the worship of their gods, The Phoenicians asked for permission to build simple magazines and temples on Spanish soil. But as time passed, these structures grew into small villages, and those villages slowly became fortified towns. Cadiz, Malaga, Cordova, and many other places became monuments to their success, silent proofs that the Phoenicians did not come only to trade. They came with an intention to stay, to build a life in a land where nature had poured out her richest blessings. Eventually, their influence spread beyond the coasts. They journeyed deep into the interior, reaching even the mountainous north. Perhaps they came to oversee the mining operations, encouraging the natives to open up the earth to pull out its hidden wealth. Even today, coins, medals, and ancient ruins mark their presence, scattered across Spain and even found as far north as Pamplona in Navarre. Almost everywhere, they left their footprints, not just in stone inscriptions or buried treasures, but deep in the religion, the language, and the customs of the Spanish people. A legacy that whispers to us still from the shadows of time. A legacy that whispers to us still from the shadows of time. But there is something we must remember about this history. It is possible that the presence of the Phoenicians in Spain has often been mixed up with that of the Carthaginians. After all, the two peoples were closely related. Their languages, their ways of life, even their superstitions were so similar that over time, the clear line between them began to blur and eventually was forgotten. This confusion is made even greater by the uncertainty that surrounds this entire period. The few dates that have been handed down to us often do not match the events they are meant to describe. They seem out of place, disconnected from the real flow of history. All of this only deepens the suspicion that what we know about these times is a mix of truth and human memory's fading echoes. In fact, if we look honestly at the whole period, from the first settlement of the Tyrians, those early Phoenician traders, to the great wars between Rome and Carthage, we find that much of it is based on conjecture, guesses built upon fragments. It is hard to even call it true history. And yet, within this darkness, a few faint facts still glimmer, like tiny lanterns shining softly, reminding us that even in the deepest shadows, a part of the past still lives, waiting for us to uncover its story. Like tiny lanterns shining softly, reminding us that even in the deepest shadows, a part of the past still lives, waiting for us to uncover its story. After the Phoenicians had shown the world the wealth that Spain could offer, another great seafaring people turned their eyes towards these shores. The Greeks. Around 600 BC, inspired by the success of the Phoenicians, they too sailed west in search of trade and opportunity. First came the Rhodians from the island of Rhodes. They landed on the coast of Catalonia, and there they founded a town, naming it Rhodia, what we know today as Rosas, in honor of their homeland. But their time there was short. Soon after, the Phocians arrived. These new Greek settlers pushed out the Rhodians from Rosas and began to spread their settlements further along the coasts of Catalonia and Valencia. Over time, other Greek expeditions came as well. Ships departed from many ports across Greece, setting sail at different times to plant small colonies along the Spanish shores. Some of the names they gave can still be recognized today, echoes of their presence carried across the centuries, despite all the changes time has brought. But unlike the Carthaginians who would come later, neither the Phoenicians nor the Greeks sought to dominate Spain. Their towns were not military strongholds, but commercial depots, busy, bustling with life, filled with peaceful citizens, merchants, and craftsmen, men who had no time nor desire for conquest or war. They came to trade, to buy and sell, to exchange the gifts of their lands with those of Spain. But then came the Carthaginians. They were different, for they carried within them both the greed of merchants and the burning ambition of conquerors. And that combination would change the fate of Spain forever. And that combination would change the fate of Spain forever. You see, the African Republic of Carthage had long been watching. They looked upon the growing success of the Tyrians, those Phoenician traders with jealous eyes. For years, they waited patiently for the right moment to take their place. Finally, that opportunity came around 480 BC. The Phoenicians, in their hunger for profit, had begun to impose harsh measures on the native Iberians. Their avarice, their endless demands, angered the proud people of the land. Tensions rose, and soon, those tensions exploded into open conflict. Both sides took up arms, and after a short but fierce struggle, the masters of the seas, those lords of trade, were forced to retreat before their warlike foes. Many Phoenician settlements fell into the hands of the victorious natives, who seemed determined to free their soil from these greedy foreigners. When Cadiz itself came under threat, the frightened Phoenicians sent out desperate calls for help. They turned to the Carthaginians, who already had a settlement on the little island of Ibiza. The Carthaginians seized this chance eagerly. Some even say it was they who had secretly sown the seeds of this quarrel, whispering words that fanned small disputes into great flames. Whether that is true or not, one thing is certain. They gathered their forces and landed a strong army on the coast of Boeotia. What followed is mostly lost to history. The details of those battles have vanished like footprints in shifting sands. But the end is clear. The Carthaginians crushed both the Phoenicians and the natives and claimed the prize they had coveted for so long. From that day onwards, Cadiz became their stronghold, a fortress to retreat to whenever danger pressed upon them. And more than that, it became an arsenal where they forged the chains with which they would one day seek to bind the whole of Spain. From that day onwards, Cadiz became their stronghold, a fortress to retreat to whenever danger pressed upon them, and an arsenal where they forged the chains with which they would one day seek to bind the whole of Spain. We are told that the progress of Carthaginian arms was irresistible. Wherever their armies marched, victory followed. But, though their power could not be denied, their advance was not swift. At least, if we can trust the dates given by ancient writers. It took them many years to bring the provinces under their control. Andalusia, Granada, Murcia, Valencia, Catalonia. These lands did not recognize Carthaginian supremacy until much later, around 235 BC, when Hamilcar Barca himself, the father of the great Hannibal, led his campaigns across the peninsula. Even then, it was said that these provinces were overrun rather than truly subdued. For deep within Spain, in the rugged mountainous districts, lived fierce and warlike tribes. They would never bow their heads to the Carthaginian yoke, not even when the most hardened veteran armies of Africa marched against them. Their spirit remained free, unbroken, echoing the ancient independence of their Iberian forefathers. A reminder that though empires may rise and conquer, the mountains always keep their secrets and their people keep their pride. A reminder that though empires may rise and conquer, the mountains always keep their secrets and their people keep their pride. For 8 long years, the Carthaginian general Hamilcar Barca spent his life extending and securing these new conquests. He needed every ounce of his courage, and few commanders in history ever had more. Day after day, he faced the fierce resistance of tribes who gloried in their freedom and knew nothing of fear. To hold these lands, he built fortresses across Spain. It is said that the great city of Barcelona itself was among them. In these strongholds, he placed his troops to overawe the surrounding country, to remind the people that Carthage now ruled these lands. Yet he himself never rested in one place for long. With a portion of his forces, he moved from region to region, wherever his presence was needed, putting down revolts and crushing resistance with an iron hand. But perhaps it was his severity, his unbending harshness that turned the hearts of the people against him. For no one loves a ruler who rules only through fear. In the end, his ambitions were checked by the Edetani and the Saguntines. These brave people openly rose in revolt. They prepared themselves for war determined to defend their freedom at any cost. Hamilcar fell upon them with all his might, but neither the size of his army nor his own legendary bravery could overcome men whose hearts burned with the hope of freedom and the thirst for revenge. The battle was fierce and bloody. 2/3 of his army perished, and Hamilcar himself fell in that struggle, leaving behind a legacy of conquest and an unfulfilled dream of empire. His son Hannibal was still too young to take command, so the Carthaginian Senate gave the leadership to Hamilcar's son-in-law, Hasdrubal. Hasdrubal knew when to be cruel, but he also knew when to show mercy. Unlike Hamilcar, he adopted a policy of conciliation towards the natives, perhaps because he had his own ambitions. Many believe that Hasdrubal dreamed of carving out an independent kingdom in Spain for himself alone, and so he worked to win the support of the people for the day when he might have to stand against Carthage itself. For Punic loyalty, like Punic faith, lasted only as long as it served their own advantage. And in those days, betrayal and ambition walked hand in hand, shaping the fate of nations. And in those days, betrayal and ambition walked hand in hand, shaping the fate of nations. During Hasdrubal's rule, he founded a city that would stand as the most glorious monument of his administration, Cartagena. Built upon the gulf that still bears its name, Cartagena was gifted with an admirable harbor. Under Hasdrubal, it rose into greatness, becoming a center of Carthaginian power and ambition in Spain. But his growing success and the nature of his designs soon roused fear. The Greek colonies along the coasts of Catalonia and Valencia watched him with deepening unease. And in the interior, many proud, independent nations felt the looming threat of Carthage upon their lands. Together, they resolved upon a desperate choice. They would call upon a third power, one that had long watched Carthage's rise with jealous eyes: Rome. When Rome heard their plea, she embraced their cause eagerly. It was 227 BC. Some say that Rome herself had secretly stirred up this discontent. She sent a delegation to Carthage demanding assurances. The Carthaginian Senate yielded two important concessions. First, that they would not push their conquests beyond the river Ebro, and second, that they would not disturb the Saguntines or any of the other Greek colonies along the coast. Hasdrubal outwardly agreed to these terms, but in secret, he began to gather his forces. Silently, carefully, he prepared for one final effort to bring the whole of Spain under Carthaginian rule before Rome could intervene. For 3 years, his preparations continued. Then, when all was ready, he threw off the mask and marched towards Saguntum. But fate had other plans. On his way, Hasdrubal was assassinated. His killer was a mere slave, yet driven by a powerful cause. Hasdrubal had killed the man's master, a native prince, and this slave burned with a devotion to his master's memory that no threat could shake. Even when captured by Hannibal himself and subjected to unspeakable torments, his courage and his silence never broke. In that dark moment, he proved that even the smallest and humblest of men could change the course of history. And so, the story of conquest continued, passing now into the hands of Hannibal, a name that would soon cast its long shadow, not just over Spain, but over Rome itself. And so the story of conquest continued, passing now into the hands of Hannibal. At this time, Hannibal was just 25 years old. Yet even at such a young age, he was more feared than all his predecessors combined, for within him burned a rare combination of gifts. He possessed military talents and personal courage, perhaps unmatched in any age. Alongside his bravery was an astonishing coolness of judgment, a mind that could weigh the tides of war without haste, and an iron will that never wavered from its purpose. Hasdrubal, for all his cunning, was driven by self-interest alone. But Hannibal was different. At the very heart of all his actions lay one consuming principle: revenge. Revenge against Rome, the bitter enemy of Carthage. And deeper still, revenge against those who had destroyed his family, his people, his pride. There is, within this fierce resolve of Hannibal, a certain moral grandeur, a greatness that draws our admiration even though his purpose was dark and merciless. For in his eyes, there was only one road before him, the road to vengeance, and he would walk it without fear and without regret. A young man carrying upon his shoulders the ancient hatred of his nation and ready to shake the world itself to fulfill that destiny. A young man carrying upon his shoulders the ancient hatred of his nation and ready to shake the world itself to fulfill that destiny. Hannibal wasted no time. With burning purpose, he began extending his conquests and gathering the resources needed for the grand struggle he knew was coming, the war with Rome. He first turned his eyes to the warlike tribes of what we now call Castile and Leon. One by one, he subdued them. Then, at the foot of the Pyrenees, he brought rich silver mines into full operation, filling his war chests with wealth to fuel his campaigns. At the head of an army, 150, 0 strong, Hannibal marched against Saguntum. He surrounded the city, laying siege to it in due form. When the Roman deputies arrived, sent by their senate to warn him that any attack upon Saguntum would be seen as a declaration of war against Rome itself, Hannibal remained unmoved, for he had vowed the destruction of Saguntum. With relentless force, he pressed the siege. But inside those walls, the defenders fought with a courage that defied even Hannibal's genius for war. For 9 long months, the battle raged. Neither his vast army nor his unmatched tactics could bring down the city's walls. In the end, it was not sword or spear that defeated Saguntum. It was hunger. Famine proved a deadlier enemy than Carthage's greatest general. When the citizens realized that hope was lost, they chose an ending that would echo through history. They gathered all their treasures, everything that would burn, and built a great funeral pyre within the city. They placed their wives and children around it. Then, these brave men issued forth from the gates, charging into the midst of Hannibal's army. The battle that followed was a slaughter. Though they fought with desperation, they were too few, and the enemy too many. Almost every man of Saguntum fell beneath Carthaginian swords. Back within the city, their wives watched, waiting for the outcome they knew would come. When they saw their men defeated, they lit the pyre, and with flames rising around them, they threw themselves and their children into the fire. Soon, the burning city revealed its terrible end to Hannibal. His soldiers entered, cutting down the few stragglers they found, the old, the weak, those too frail to fight or flee. Some managed to escape into the countryside, but Saguntum was no more. Thus, in 219 BC, perished one of Spain's most flourishing cities. Its destruction would be forever remembered, for it hastened, if it did not cause, the Second Punic War, a war that would set Hannibal upon his greatest path and change the fate of Rome forever. A war that would set Hannibal upon his greatest path and change the fate of Rome forever. With Saguntum in ashes behind him, Hannibal gathered his forces for the greatest invasion of his life. He was ready to march upon Italy itself. The story of his exploits beyond Spain, his crossing of the Alps, and his terror over Rome is told in the history of Rome. For now, while Hannibal spread destruction far from home, and the towers of the eternal city trembled before his might, let us turn our gaze back to the land he left behind. Spain. Under Carthaginian rule, life for the native peoples became harsh beyond endurance. All agree that the Carthaginian yoke was intolerable. The local governors, driven by greed, searched endlessly for excuses to seize the wealth of the people. Captive tribes were forced to labor in the mines under brutal conditions. A mercenary soldiery, proud and haughty, roamed the land, demanding what they pleased, taking what they wanted. With each passing day, their insolence grew. On the other side, the pain of oppression grew deeper in the hearts of the people. This clash of arrogance and suffering was like flint and steel, and soon sparks would ignite into flames. Commotion swept through Spain, shaking it to its very center. For though the Carthaginians thought themselves masters, they had planted the seeds of their own destruction, and it would not be long before those seeds would grow into a force that would sweep them from the land they had once ruled with iron and greed. And it would not be long before those seeds would grow into a force that would sweep them from the land they had once ruled with iron and greed. For now, a new power turned its eyes upon Spain, the Romans. Between 219 and 206 BC, as Hannibal's victories shook Italy, Rome realized the importance of Spain. Perhaps they feared Hannibal's growing strength, or perhaps they understood the value of having the brave Spaniards as their allies. Whatever their reason, they sent larger armies across the sea, led by some of their greatest generals. It was here, in the rugged lands of Spain, that a young Roman commander first made his name, Publius Cornelius Scipio. History would remember him as Scipio Africanus, conqueror of Carthage in Africa. But before Africa, there was Spain. Here, Scipio won not just battles, but the hearts of the native people, for he possessed great and noble qualities, but above all, self-command. One story of his life has inspired painters, poets, and moralists for centuries. It is said that after capturing a city, a beautiful young woman was brought before him. By the laws of that age, she was his slave, to do with as he pleased. But Scipio looked upon her and saw her sorrow and her dignity. Instead of claiming her, he restored her, untouched and unharmed, to her betrothed husband. In that single act, he showed the people of Spain that Rome could be just as well as strong. And so, fighting alongside the Spaniards, Scipio drove the Carthaginians from their last strongholds. In 206 BC, the banner of Carthage was lowered, and Rome stood victorious. Spain had changed masters, but her spirit, her proud heart, remained her own. Spain had changed masters, but her spirit, her proud heart, remained her own. For the Romans, in driving out the Carthaginians, had not come as liberators. Their true purpose was not the freedom of their brave Spanish allies. Instead, they moved quickly to turn the peninsula into a Roman province, ruled by their praetors under Roman law. But Spain was never a land to bow easily before foreign rulers. The natives resisted these new conquerors just as fiercely as they had resisted the last. In the north, the city of Numantia became a symbol of this defiance. Besieged by a second Scipio, Numantia stood as Saguntum once had, unbroken, unyielding. When the people sent delegations to plead for mercy, the Roman consul coldly replied that he was content to wait until famine did his work for him. But the citizens of Numantia would not wait to die, slowly, by hunger. Some took poison. Some fell upon their own swords. Others set fire to their houses, choosing to perish in the flames rather than see their city fall. In the end, not a single living soul remained. All had chosen death over dishonor. It was 133 BC. Yet, even as Numantia burned, other tribes still defied Rome. In the northwest, the fierce Cantabrians remained unconquered throughout the days of the Roman Republic. Elsewhere, Celtiberia in the north, Baetica in the south, and Lusitania in the west fell only after long and bitter struggles. These lands became part of the Roman province of Hispania. But peace never truly came. Time and again, the people rose in revolt, driven by the cruelty and greed of their Roman governors. And even the defeated leaders of Roman factions found refuge here, gathering strength in these rugged lands to rise once more against the masters of the world. For Spain, though conquered, was never truly tamed. Her mountains, her warriors, and her spirit remained as wild and unbroken as the winds that sweep her ancient plains. For Spain, though conquered, was never truly tamed. Her mountains, her warriors, and her spirit remained as wild and unbroken as the winds that sweep her ancient plains. Among all the brave resistances against Rome, one stands above the rest: the rebellion of Lusitania under Viriathus. Viriathus was no nobleman nor general trained in marble halls. He was born a simple shepherd, but fate turned his life upon darker roads. He became an outlaw, a robber, and then the leader of a band of fierce men living free beyond Roman law. As Roman oppression grew, the discontented gathered around him. Under his banner, shepherds and warriors alike rose up, and Viriathus defeated Roman armies again and again. But Rome could not conquer him by force. So they turned to treachery. The consul Servilius bribed 3 of Viriathus's own followers to creep into his tent at night. There, as he slept, they plunged their daggers into the heart of their leader, and thus fell Viriathus. After his death, what Rome called rebellion and what the people called the fight for freedom was crushed. Yet Spain's story did not end there. Soon, she became the stage for another drama, the last bitter struggles of Rome's own civil wars. When Sulla triumphed in Rome, the defeated leader Sertorius fled to Spain. Here, he gathered his strength, defying the mighty dictator. For years, Sertorius ruled, wiser and kinder than many Roman governors. But treachery ended him too. His own partisans, hungry for gold and power, murdered him. Then came Pompey the Great, who crushed the last of Sertorius's forces. During his command in Spain, Pompey earned the respect and goodwill of the people. So, when his fateful contest with Julius Caesar came, Spain stood by his side. But after Pompey's death, his party still held out in Spain. Julius Caesar came in person. With unmatched military genius, he subdued the last resistance and pacified the province. And thus, Spain's relationship with Rome began to change. As long as Rome treated her people as conquered slaves, Spain remained restless, unbroken, forever ready to rise. But when wiser rulers came, when Rome extended a hand of respect and friendship, the proud Spanish tribes grasped it. They became, not merely subjects, but some of the proudest and most loyal citizens of the vast Roman Empire. For united under their own leaders, they had resisted Rome. But united under Julius and Augustus Caesar, they became the most Roman of all Rome's provinces. Their courage, their discipline, their fiery spirit would shape the destiny of the empire itself. And their story was only just beginning. Their courage, their discipline, their fiery spirit would shape the destiny of the empire itself. And their story was only just beginning. For the Spanish people have always held one enduring trait, a deep susceptibility to personal influence. Under Hasdrubal, whose manner was kind and sympathetic, they accepted the dominion of Carthage. Under Hannibal, fierce and commanding, they fought as the hardiest and most loyal soldiers in his Punic armies that shook Italy to its core. Then came Scipio after the fall of Saguntum. He entered Spain not as a destroyer, but as a deliverer. With clemency and justice, he won their hearts so completely that the Spaniards, in their fierce devotion, would have crowned him as their king. But Scipio, though noble, was not always clement. Those who followed him, the successors of Sempronius Gracchus, were neither just nor wise. They ruled with harshness and folly. As the old Spanish proverb says, "For great men, great deeds are reserved." And soon, Spain would witness the arrival of one of the greatest men the world has ever known, Julius Caesar. He came marching sternly at the head of his legions through the rugged lands of Spain. He did not stay his hand until he had reached far off Corunna at the edge of the world, where he chastised and astonished the wild tribes of Brigantium, the land known as Finisterre. Yet, for all his sternness and conquest, his policy in the settled districts was always wise, genial, and pacific. 4 times, Caesar set foot upon Spanish soil, and On his fourth visit, his legions now filled with loyal and admiring Spaniards, he fought, not for glory, but for his very existence, on the bloody field of Munda. It was there, in Spain, that Caesar's final triumph was sealed. And with that triumph began a new chapter. The dark days of early Spanish history gave way to the long peace and rising prosperity under Roman rule. For though Spain had been conquered by force, it was men like Caesar, with vision and wisdom, who finally won her heart. And so, the proud peninsula entered a new age of civilization and enduring fame. And so, under Caesar, Spain entered a new age of civilization and enduring fame. Yet, peace in Spain was never simple nor swift. Disturbances rose again as proud tribes refused to bow their heads. It was only under Caesar's successor, Augustus, that Spain was finally and completely subdued. Even the fierce Cantabrians of the northwest, who had defied every conqueror before, were at last forced into submission. With their fall, the entire peninsula came under Rome's unchallenged rule, and once reduced to submission, Spain fell into a long, silent slumber under the tranquil weight of imperial servitude. For centuries, she lay quiet beneath the firm hand of the Roman emperors. Yet within that peace, Spain thrived. She became one of the most valuable and flourishing provinces in all the empire. The great Roman writer Pliny tells us that Spain was home to no fewer than 360 cities. It was a land rich not only in gold and silver, but in wisdom, art, and men of greatness. During these centuries of Roman rule, Spain gave birth to some of Rome's most celebrated minds, the poets Lucan and Martial, whose verses still echo through history, the philosopher Seneca, whose stoic teachings guided emperors and men alike. And beyond poets and philosophers, Spain bore two of the very few good Roman emperors, Trajan, under whom the empire reached its greatest extent, and Hadrian, the wise builder who fortified its borders with walls that stand to this day. Spain's sons rose to the highest pinnacles of Roman power. And though she lived under the shadow of imperial rule, her spirit, her intellect, and her pride lit the halls of Rome itself. For even in quiet subjugation, Spain remained a land destined to shape the course of empires. For even in quiet subjugation, Spain remained a land destined to shape the course of empires. Yet, it must not be supposed that Rome's authority fell evenly over every corner of this vast peninsula. In those early centuries, Roman administration was a patchwork of powers and privileges. Some cities, though under Rome's shadow, still governed themselves by their own ancient laws. Others depended directly upon the great metropolis, the heart of the Roman world itself. Some were granted freedom, left to their old laws and local tribunals. They bore many titles, reflecting their place in the Roman order: colonial, municipal, Roman, allied, tributary. And some enjoyed the prized right of latium, granting privileges just below that of full Roman citizenship. Take the province of Tarragona, for example. It held 179 cities. 12 were colonial settlements of Roman veterans and citizens. 13 were purely Roman cities. 18 enjoyed the Latin law. 1 was an official ally. And 135 paid tribute as subject cities. In Baetica, the rich southern province, there were 185 cities. 9 colonial, 18 municipal, 29 under Latin law, 6 free cities, 3 allied, and 120 tributary towns. Lusitania, in the rugged west, had 45 cities, 5 colonial, 1 municipal, 3 Latin, and 36 tributary. Such was the intricate and masterful web of Roman administration. Through this careful structure, Rome ruled with both firmness and subtlety, granting rights, taking tribute, rewarding loyalty, and punishing rebellion. It was a system that bound Spain ever closer to the eternal city. And though each city kept its name, its people, and its pride, they were now citizens of an empire that stretched from the deserts of Africa to the stormy isles of Britain. Spain's fate was forever woven into the grand tapestry of Rome. Spain's fate was now forever woven into the grand tapestry of Rome. But within that vast system, every city had its place, its rights, its burdens, and its privileges. The Roman colonies, scattered across the provinces, were peopled by the citizens of Rome itself. Chiefly, they were veteran soldiers rewarded with land, who brought with them the discipline and pride of the legions. These settlers forfeited not a single right by living far from the 7 hills of Rome. They remained full citizens, free to claim every privilege, free to rise to the highest honors, even in the heart of the empire. Then there were the municipal cities. These too were held in esteem, granted the dignity of Roman citizenship. Their people were exempt from the meddling hands of provincial governors, and like their colonial kin, they could walk the streets of Rome as citizens, not subjects. Below them stood those towns that held the coveted right of latium, a mark of favor, yet with limits. For in these cities, only the magistrates, those chosen to lead, were granted the status of Roman citizens. Beneath them were the free cities, the immunes. These rare towns, left untouched by Rome's direct rule, kept their ancient laws and local courts. Nor did they pay tax to support the vast machine of imperial power. This freedom was never granted lightly. More often, it was wrung from Rome by necessity and always watched with suspicion. In all of Spain, only 6 cities ever held this rare gift. Even fewer were the allied cities, the Confederata. By name and right, they were meant to be truly independent friends, not subjects. But such true allies were scarce. And at the base were the many, the tributary cities, the stipendiaria. These towns bore the heaviest burden. They paid the tribute that fed the legions, paved the roads, and gilded the marble halls of Rome. It was on their shoulders that the empire's weight pressed hardest. Yet through this intricate order, Rome ruled Spain not just by the sword, but by law, by privilege, by cunning promise, and careful control. And so, the proud cities of Iberia learned to live as sons of Rome, yet never forgot the blood that ran through their own ancient veins. And so, the proud cities of Iberia learned to live as sons of Rome, yet never forgot the blood that ran through their own ancient veins. But as the centuries passed, the sharp distinctions between these many classes began to fade. Under Emperor Otto, many Spaniards were granted the full rights of Roman citizenship. Then came Vespasian, who extended the right of latium to every city that had not yet received it. And finally, under Antoninus, every remaining barrier fell away. With a single stroke, he declared all his subjects across that vast empire to be citizens of Rome. From that moment, the civil constitution of the empire became uniform. No longer divided by privilege or ancient right, the cities of Spain now stood equal with those of Italy itself. Each city was governed in a manner that mirrored the great towns of the Italian heartland. They held their municipal councils, their curiae, and the men who sat within these councils, the decuriones, were chosen from among the leading families of each province. Yet, this office, though full of dignity, was often a burden rather than a blessing, for their role was without reward. It was a duty given without pay and with heavy responsibilities. These men were held accountable for the payment of customs and taxes. Their wealth and status made them pillars of the community, but also bound them to Rome's unyielding demands. And as for the laws that governed them, they were the same laws that ruled all of Rome. The statutes of the Republic, the edicts of the emperors, became the lifeblood of Spain's cities. Thus did Roman law and order spread like roots deep into Iberian soil, binding her fate ever tighter to the empire that ruled the world. Thus did Roman law and order spread like roots deep into Iberian soil, binding her fate ever tighter to the empire that ruled the world. But what of Spain's military state under Roman rule? This remains a subject little understood. It is known that Spain furnished a considerable number of troops for Rome's foreign wars. Countless inscriptions across the peninsula bear witness to her sons, serving under the eagle standards in lands far from home. Yet within Spain itself, the Roman garrisons were surprisingly small. Except in times of great danger or rebellion, the legions stationed there seldom exceeded 3. Just 3 legions to hold a land so vast and so proud. Such a modest force suggests that either the natives had lost all desire to regain their ancient freedom, or perhaps they had become reconciled to the rule of their mighty conquerors. In truth, Rome's policy was shrewd, for she granted the Spaniards not just citizenship, but the right to rise. They were welcomed into the highest dignities, civil, military, and even religious. A Spanish noble could sit in the Senate, command legions, or serve as a priest of the imperial cult. This wise generosity bound Spain to Rome not by chains, but by honor. It ensured not merely obedience, but loyalty. But when a man sees his path open to greatness and glory under his rulers, he no longer dreams of rebellion. He dreams of destiny. He dreams of destiny. And so, as long as the Roman Empire remained prosperous, Spain too shared in its golden days. Despite the burdens she was made to bear, there was a measure of prosperity that could not be denied. The arts of life flourished here, both the elegant and the practical. Architecture reached heights of perfection, as the ruins that remain still whisper to us today. Temples, amphitheaters, aqueducts, bridges of stone that defy the centuries, all stand in silent testament to Rome's enduring touch. Agriculture, too, was cultivated with skill and care. The great naturalist Pliny himself praised the fertile plains of Iberia. Her soil yielded grain in abundance, olive oil of fine quality, and fruits that delighted every palate. And her flocks of sheep, prized even then for their fine wool, were held in high esteem, just as they are in our own day. The vineyards flourished under the Iberian sun. In the lands around Tarragona, the grapes ripened into wines so pure and rich that Roman connoisseurs declared them equal to the finest vintages of Italy herself. All these gifts of nature, along with the treasures drawn from her mines and the growing demand for Spanish-made wares, gave rise to an extensive commerce. Indeed, trade under the Romans surpassed what had ever been seen, even in the bustling days of Carthaginian power. For here lay the great difference between these two conquering nations. The African Carthaginians, with the cold selfishness of traders, hoarded every advantage for themselves alone. But the Romans, noble in their dominion, allowed others to share in these blessings. They opened the gates of prosperity and invited their subjects to enter. And so, Spain prospered under Rome, bound not only by law and conquest, but by the promise of shared abundance. But prosperity alone does not fill the deepest longing of the human heart. For amid temples of marble and markets overflowing with wealth, there arose a new voice, soft yet unyielding, the voice of a faith that would one day reshape the soul of Spain. It is here that our story turns to the introduction of Christianity into Iberia's ancient lands. If tradition were still accepted as final truth, we would have no difficulty in naming the first bearer of the gospel to Spain, for Spanish legend speaks with unwavering devotion of St. James the Elder. It is said that he traversed the peninsula from the western lands of Lusitania and Galicia to the heart of Aragon, that in Saragossa, the Virgin Mary herself appeared to him in a vision commanding that a church be built in her honor upon that very spot, and that after his martyrdom in Jerusalem, his faithful disciples carried his body across land and sea, bringing it to Iria Flavia in Galicia, and finally to Compostela. There, his remains would rest to be venerated by the faithful, as long as the world itself endures. Such is the sacred conviction of Spain, held with unbreakable faith by generations. It is also believed, with equal assurance, that St. Paul himself came to these shores, that he continued the holy work of his martyred brother, planting seeds of the new doctrine in Catalonia, Aragon, Valencia, and above all, in the sunlit lands of Andalusia. Whether these accounts be legend or truth wrapped in legend, one fact shines clear. Spain bore witness to Christian martyrs as early as the 2nd century, perhaps even in the 1st. And thus, beneath the shadow of Roman power, a silent revolution began, a faith that no empire, however mighty, could ever crush. Yet, this new faith, born in humility, would not walk an easy path upon Iberian soil, for it was during the reign of the fierce Emperor Diocletian that the fires of persecution burned with their greatest fury across the peninsula. Churches were torn down, scriptures burned, and believers, hunted like outlaws, sealed their faith with blood. But it must be said with honesty that in those days, the crown of martyrdom was not always worn with calm courage alone. There were some whose zeal burned brighter than wisdom, who sought death, not with the sober resolve of truth, but with an intemperate fervor that clouded reason. And yet, when Diocletian passed from the stage of history, the fury of persecution too began to cool. The empire itself fell into civil wars under Maximian and Constantius Chlorus. In these turbulent times, the Christians began to breathe once more, to gather in hidden assemblies without constant fear. Then came Constantine, the emperor who saw a cross in his vision and turned the tide of history. After his conversion, the church found peace, at least from without, but within, new storms gathered. For now, the followers of Athanasius and Arius divided the church from within, clouding the horizon of her tranquility with bitter quarrels over faith itself. And so, while the empire tottered under its own weight, the faith that once hid in catacombs rose to power. But peace, born of triumph, carried with it trials of its own. But even as the faith spread and persecution waned, the church in Spain began to shape its foundations through councils that gathered its leaders under one roof. Of the 3 great national councils held during those first 4 centuries, the earliest was the Council of Iliberis, or Iliberis, a town once standing near what we now know as Granada. This council, so ancient in its authority, holds a unique place in history, for it was probably held before the conversion of Constantine, and therefore even before the famous Council of Nicaea. If this is true, then Iliberis was not only the earliest council in Spain, but the oldest known council in the Christian world, whose acts have reached us through the shadows of time. The second council, that of Caesar Augusta, modern-day Saragossa, held in 380 AD, gathered only 12 bishops. Its sole purpose was to condemn the heresy of Priscillian, a reminder that even as the faith spread, its unity was often threatened from within. The third, the First Council of Toledo in 400 AD, saw 19 bishops in attendance, along with many clergy of lower rank. Their first act was profound, to officially accept the canons of Nicaea, especially those defining the ordination of priests. But more striking still was the declaration within their symbol of faith, where they proclaimed the procession of the Holy Spirit from both the Father and the Son, a doctrine that the universal church would not formally receive until the Fourth Lateran Council in 1215. Their 20 canons spoke of holy orders, the chastity of virgins devoted to God, and the continency required of clergy and their widows. And in these councils, we see the Spanish church still in its early, unstructured form. There were no archbishops, no primates, or metropolitans. The bishops were equals, independent in power, with only the seniority of consecration marking any difference among them. Nor was there any rule that appeals must be carried to Rome, though the respect held for that holy see and the wisdom of its shepherds often led Spanish believers to seek its judgment. In those days, bishops and clergy were chosen by the people themselves, and baptism was administered by bishop or priest, or even by a deacon when needed. In urgent moments, even a layman could baptize, provided his life was marked by purity and he had not entered a second marriage. Such were the beginnings of a church destined to shape the soul of Spain for centuries to come. But even as the early Spanish church laid down its counsels and doctrines, it also shaped the lives of its believers through laws of penance, solemn rules meant to restore those who had fallen into sin. Ceremonial penance in those days was no hidden confession whispered in the shadows. It was a public act of humility, a satisfaction given openly to the church, especially when the crime brought deep scandal upon the community. The penitent, marked by sorrow and shame, would sit apart from the rest for a period proportioned to the gravity of their offense. For some, the burden was light. A year of penance was laid upon the gambler, the player of dice, for in this ancient game, the names of pagan gods were invoked with each throw. But for others, the punishment was harsher. 2 years of penance awaited the subdeacon who dared to marry a third time and the ecclesiastic who wore a crown mimicking the headdress of pagan priests. 3 years of penance were imposed on the man who lent his clothing for pagan processions, on the deacon who, before ordination, confessed a mortal sin, and upon parents who unjustly broke the betrothals of their children. 5 years of penance fell upon him who married his daughter-in-law or his sister-in-law, upon widows who sinned and married their accomplices, upon husbands or wives guilty of adultery, upon single women who fell with different men, upon backbiters, however trivial their offense, and upon deacons found guilty of any grave crime committed before their ordination. For the housewife, if by stripes she involuntarily caused the death of her slave, 5 years of penance were imposed, but if she did so willingly, her penance stretched to 7 years. 10 years were required for the apostate or heretic returning to the faith, for Christians who, out of curiosity, attended pagan sacrifices, for all prostitutes, and for consecrated virgins who broke their sacred vows. But there were sins for which penance lasted a lifetime. The widow of a bishop, priest, or deacon who remarried bore this burden till death, as did those who frequently violated their marriage vows, and Gentile priests who, though converted and baptized, returned to offer sacrifices to idols. Beyond these fixed penances, the bishop held power to suspend any man from fellowship with the faithful, whether he sat at the table of a Jew, or spread libellous words and satire against others, or lived in such. Scandal that public censure was the only cure. In these ancient laws, we see a church both strict and pastoral, striving to cleanse its people, to bind them again to the faith, and to remind every soul that forgiveness comes through humility, confession, and the long, quiet path of penance. Yet, even amid these strict laws of penance, there existed a secret path to forgiveness, a way by which the weary penitent could return to communion before the long years of punishment had passed. This was the peace of the confessors. Who were these confessors? They were men and women who had suffered persecution, who had borne torments for the faith of Christ, whose courage in the face of tyranny shone like light through the early church. To them, the penitent would come, humbly seeking grace. And the confessor, moved by pity, would grant him his peace, written upon a scroll known as Literae, Confessoria, or Pacificae. With this sacred letter in hand, the penitent would approach the bishop. The bishop, seeing the authority of the confessor's peace, would absolve him and give him a new letter, the Literae Communicatoria, proof that he was restored to communion, free to approach the sacramental table in any church he entered. Yet behind this beautiful image lay a shadow, for the custom was rooted in a belief that from the abundance of the confessor's merits, they could spare some for those who had none of their own. In time, this opened a door to grievous abuse. It laid the groundwork for indulgences, for men selling what should have been a gift of grace, and in later centuries, these indulgences would stir such outrage that even the common sense and natural justice of mankind rose up in protest. But in those early days, the peace of the confessors was a torch of hope, a glimpse of mercy for souls bowed under the heavy yoke of penance, longing to return to the embrace of the church. But what of the clergy themselves? these shepherds who guided the faithful in the dark valleys of early Spain. On the question of their matrimony and continency, bitter disputes have long raged among scholars. Some insist that from the days of the apostles, strict celibacy was demanded of them, a life apart, free from the ties of marriage. Others, however, contend that such was not the ancient way. They argue that marriage was indeed permitted to priests and bishops, though bound by certain restrictions, just as laymen were bound by moral law. Yet, among the many rulings of those early Spanish councils, one decree stands out with quiet peculiarity. It was the permission granted to bishops and other ecclesiastics to engage in any honorable branch of commerce so long as they kept their dealings within their own districts. Imagine a bishop presiding over sacred mysteries by morning and by evening overseeing his olive groves or vineyards, or trading fine wool and crafted goods along the streets of his pueblo. Such was the intertwining of sacred duty and daily life, in an age where survival demanded many labors and where even the hands that blessed were sometimes calloused by the toil of trade. Yet what of those souls, men and women alike, who chose to consecrate their entire lives to God? In these early centuries, the church acknowledged them and protected them as precious lights in a pagan darkness. But monasteries, as later generations knew them, had not yet risen upon Spanish soil. Instead, the women who vowed virginity before the altar and in the hands of the bishop, and the men who pledged themselves to continence and contemplation, lived their quiet devotions in simpler ways. Some remained within their own houses, living apart from the world, though still within it. Others gathered in humble communities, 2 or 3 at most, often residing in the homes of aged priests who guided their spiritual discipline. The women, upon their first profession, assumed the veil, a solemn and public sign of their calling. Yet the church, with wisdom born of caution, feared vows uttered too soon. At the Council of Saragossa, it was decreed that no woman should take the irrevocable vow or assume the veil before her 40th year. Chastity before that age was indeed praised and blessed, but final vows awaited maturity of mind and faith. Some of these early rulings may strike us today as severe, but we must remember the world they inhabited. It was a world where paganism still reigned strong, where idolatry and moral corruption threatened the fragile flock. So the fathers of Iliberis laid down strict canons to guard against temptation and the old pagan ways. Some rulings seem almost absurd to our modern ears. One canon, for example, forbade the remarriage of widows of ecclesiastics, a decree rooted more in ritual purity than mercy. Another, perhaps the strangest, prohibited Christian women from keeping long-haired slaves. But behind this curious law lay a grim truth. These slaves, men from Gaul or Germany, served outwardly as hairdressers to wealthy Roman ladies. In reality, they were kept to gratify secret and shameful desires, a corruption born of the licentiousness of pagan life. As centuries turned, however, the influence of Christianity grew, purifying the hearts of women and men alike, and sweeping away these shadows of an earlier, darker world. But even as faith spread across Hispania, shadows followed close behind. For like all Christian provinces of the empire, Spain had its heresies. In those turbulent centuries, none was more divisive than Arianism, a doctrine that denied the eternal divinity of Christ. During the reign of Constantine and his sons, this teaching tore the Christian world asunder. In Spain, it was Ausius, the venerable bishop of Cordova, who rose in fierce defense of orthodoxy. With a zeal only surpassed by Athanasius himself, Ausius stood as a pillar against the Arian tide. Yet it was not Arianism alone that threatened the Church of Spain. A darker, more insidious heresy arose, the heresy of the Priscillianists. Its seeds were sown by a wandering Egyptian named Mark, a Gnostic heretic whose silver tongue wove ancient doctrines into seductive words. From Gaul, he crossed into Spain, and there his teachings found a fertile soil. Among his first disciples stood Priscillian, a Spaniard of wealth, eloquence, and boundless ambition. Soon, he became the head of the sect. Priscillian taught that marriage itself was a tyrant's chain, that pleasure was not sin, but the highest privilege of human nature, that to follow the impulses of desire was true wisdom and virtue. He He wove together the dualism of Mani with its two eternal principles of light and darkness, and the errors of Sabellius, who blurred the distinct persons of the Holy Trinity. To these he added the Chaldean superstitions of starry fates and destinies, and the subtle metaphysics of Greek and Egyptian sages. Such teachings spread like wildfire. Women, drawn to his sensual doctrines, embraced them in multitudes. Their example lured men to follow. Even priests and bishops fell to the enticements of his words. In time, 2 bishops of Baetica openly declared themselves his followers, and the Orthodox faithful looked on in growing dread. Finally, justice and vengeance rose together. Priscillian and his disciples were arrested. Their fate was sealed not merely by the truth of doctrine, but by the furious determination of their enemies. In the year 384, Priscillian and his closest partisans were led to execution and beheaded beneath the Roman blade. Thus perished one of Spain's earliest and most dangerous heretics, leaving behind teachings that, like dying embers, would glow in secret hearts long after his death. But the fall of Priscillian did not end his legacy. So long as the Emperor Maximus ruled, his followers faced unrelenting persecution. In every town and village, Edatius, a bishop fierce in doctrine and fiercer in cruelty, hunted them without mercy. With iron zeal, he sought to purge the land of their heresy. Yet his severities grew so harsh, so pitiless, that even his fellow bishops turned away in horror. And soon the tide turned against him. After the death of Maximus, Edatius himself was banished from his see. The fires of persecution dimmed, but they did not extinguish the hidden flame. For Priscillianism, though condemned again by the First Council of Toledo, could not be uprooted so easily. Long after the Roman emperors had faded from Hispania's memory, long after the Gothic kings rose to rule her lands, the whispered teachings of Priscillian still lingered in secret hearts, haunting the Church of Spain like an unquiet ghost that refused to be laid to rest. With the rise of Honorius, the Roman Empire lived on only by sheer sufferance. Its ancient strength was gone, and now, from the dark forests of the north, fierce barbarian hordes prepared to pour into the fertile lands of the south. A restless spirit swept across the Roman world, from distant Britain to the plains of Thrace, and Spain too would feel its force. In Britain, Constantine had dared to seize the purple of empire, raising both England and Gaul against the feeble heir of the Caesars. His son, young Constans, crossed the towering Pyrenees to win the hearts of Hispania. For a time he found success. Some welcomed him, others he compelled, but fortune is a fickle ally. Soon he was forced to return to Gaul, seeking reinforcements for his fragile claim. And as if destiny mocked their ambitions, another challenger rose, Jovinus. The rise of this rival shattered the unity of these would-be emperors. Divided, distracted, they fell, one by one, victims of imperial vengeance. For Honorius's minister had called upon a darker power to destroy them. From the cold shores of the Baltic, he summoned warlike tribes who marched south with iron and flame to crush rebellion. But this policy, though cunning in Rome's halls, proved disastrous. For to invite wolves to guard your flock is to sow ruin with your own trembling hand.